Hello and welcome to Arnie's Short Stories. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Yarmouth Yells. The Isle of Wight has always been a place of quiet charm, rolling hills, picturesque harbours, and quaint towns. But Yarmouth was different. It bore an eerie stillness, especially at night, when the wind carried piercing cries through its cobblestone streets. Locals called them the Yarmouth Yells. No one knew where they came from, and most didn't want to find out. Holly Arnold wasn't most people. A journalist by trade and an adventurer by heart, Holly had a knack for digging into mysteries others preferred to leave buried. After an unsettling tip-off from an anonymous source claiming the cries were linked to a series of unsolved murders, she packed her camera, recorder, and courage, and caught the first ferry to Yarmouth. Chapter 1: The Arrival. The town seemed normal at first glance. Tourists bustled near the pier during the day, seagulls cawed overhead, and fishermen hauled in their day's catch. But Holly noticed the tension in the locals' eyes, the way their smiles faltered when she asked about the cries. "You don't want to go poking around," warned the innkeeper, an elderly woman named Mrs. Beckett, as Holly checked into the small. Curiosity killed the cat. Holly smiled politely but didn't reply. She had no intention of letting the story slip away. Chapter 2: The Yells. That night, Holly sat by her window, a recorder in her lap and a notebook open beside her. Midnight came, and with it the first yell. It sliced through the night air, a high-pitched wail that seemed to carry both agony and anger. Holly hit record. The cries came again, this time closer, almost as if the wind itself was carrying them to her. They ebbed and flowed, each shriek more unsettling than the last. They were too human to dismiss as animal noises, too mournful to ignore. Driven by a mix of fear and determination, Holly grabbed her flashlight and coat and headed out into the night. Chapter 3: The Forgotten Pier. The town was deserted, save for the occasional flicker of a curtain as a resident peeked out, watching her every move. Holly followed the cries toward the pier, its wooden planks creaking beneath her boots. At the far end stood a dilapidated structure, a birdhouse she'd noticed earlier but thought abandoned. The cries stopped the moment she stepped inside. The air smelled of damp wood and decay. A single lantern hung from the rafters, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Holly shone her flashlight around, her heart pounding. That's when she saw it. Scratched into the wall were names, dozens of them. Beside each name was a date. The most recent was just 3 weeks ago. Chapter 4: The Legend of Mary Cotterell. Back at the inn, Holly confronted Mrs. Beckett. The woman's face turned ashen when Holly mentioned the names. "Mary Cotterell," she whispered. Mary Cotterell had been a fisherman's daughter in the 1800s, Mrs. Beckett explained. Engaged to a sailor, she waited on the pier every night for his return. But one stormy evening his ship never came. Grief-stricken and humiliated, Druma swore that he had abandoned her. Mary threw herself into the sea. Her body was never recovered, but soon after, the cries began. She hates betrayal. They say anyone who hears her cries is marked. She'll stop at nothing until she drags you into the water with her. Chapter 5. The cries returned the next night, louder, angrier. Holly stayed in her room, paralyzed by fear. But when the door to her room slammed open on its own, she knew hiding wouldn't save her. She grabbed her things and ran back to the pier, hoping to confront whatever it was haunting her. This time the boathouse was filled with water, though the tide wasn't high. In the reflection of the lantern's glow, Holly saw her own face, pale, trembling, and behind her, Mary Cotterell. Mary's figure was translucent, her hair floating as if she were underwater, her eyes black voids. She opened her mouth to scream, and Holly fell to her knees, clutching her ears. Chapter 6: The Final Stand. Holly remembered the names in the boathouse. Each victim had likely heard the cries and failed to appease Mary. But Holly had an idea. She pulled out her recorder, her voice shaking. "Mary," she whispered, "I'm not your enemy." The apparition paused, her mournful wails turning into soft sobs. Holly realized that Mary wasn't seeking vengeance, she wanted someone to listen, to remember her. Chapter 7: The Yells Cease. The following morning, Holly wrote her story, detailing Mary's life and tragic end. She included the names of the forgotten victims, vowing they'd be remembered too. When the article was published, something changed in Yarmouth. The cries stopped. The air felt lighter, the shadows less oppressive. Holly stayed another night to confirm. For the first time in decades, the town was silent. She left Yarmouth with a newfound respect for the dead and the stories they leave behind, vowing to never ignore the echoes of the past again. Epilogue: the unfinished story. Months passed, and Holly moved on to other stories, but Yarmouth lingered in her mind. The article had garnered significant attention, turning the small town into a hub for paranormal enthusiasts and historians. Mrs. Beckett even wrote to Holly, thanking her for giving Yarmouth peace. But peace, Holly learned, was fleeting. One night, as she sat in her London apartment, working on a story about a haunted theatre, her phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, "The Yells have returned." Her stomach dropped. The email was from a local historian, claiming that the cries had started again, but they weren't confined to Yarmouth. Nearby towns along the coast were now reporting the same eerie wails. Even more disturbing was the mention of names appearing on walls in these places, new names, and none were from Yarmouth. Attached was a voice recording. Holly hesitated before pressing play. The cries were unmistakable. They were Mary's, but louder, angrier, and filled with a vengeful energy that hadn't been there before. Her blood ran cold when the recording ended with a whisper, low but clear. Holly. She stared at the screen, the silence in her apartment oppressive. The air felt heavy, the faint scent of salt water creeping in. Her laptop flickered. The screen went black, then illuminated again. This time, it displayed a single sentence. "You told my story, but they forgot." Holly knew she couldn't ignore the warning. If Mary's cries were spreading, her spirit had grown stronger and angrier. But why? Had Holly's article, despite its good intentions, disturbed Mary's rest? Or had the attention it brought failed to provide the closure Mary needed? Armed with her recorder, camera, and a notebook filled with hastily jotted theories, Holly returned to the Isle of Wight. She wasn't sure what she hoped to find answers, perhaps, or a way to stop Mary before her wrath consumed more lives. The moment Holly stepped off the ferry, the wind carried a piercing wail through the air. This time, it didn't feel like a warning. It felt like a summons. As she walked toward the pier, the cries grew louder, more insistent. Locals peered out from behind curtains, their faces pale with fear. The boathouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette dark against the moonlit sea. The descent. Inside the boathouse, the air was damp and suffocating. The lantern swayed, though there was no breeze. Water pulled around her boots, rising steadily with each step. "Mary," Holly called. "I'm here." The water rippled. From the darkness, Mary's translucent form emerged, her hair flowing like seaweed. This time, she wasn't alone. Shadows swirled behind her, figures of those whose names had been scratched into the walls, her victims. "You promised they'd remember," Mary hissed. "But they've turned my pain into a spectacle." Holly's mind raced. The tourists, the ghost hunters, they weren't honoring Mary's memory, they were exploiting it. "I can fix this," Holly said. "I'll make them understand." Mary's gaze bore into her, unblinking. The water rose to Holly's knees, icy and numbing. "Words won't be enough. Prove your devotion." Holly froze. She understood the implication. To stop Mary, she'd have to sacrifice herself, becoming part of the story, part of the legend. The choice. Holly glanced at the recorder in her hand, still running. If she stayed, Mary's story would finally have its witness, its voice. But if she left, the cries would continue, spreading further, claiming more lives. She took a deep breath and made her decision. "I'll stay." Mary's expression softened. The water stilled, and the shadows behind her faded. As Holly stepped deeper into the water, the cries quieted, replaced by a serene silence. The recorder slipped from her hand, floating briefly before sinking. The last thing she saw before the darkness consumed her was Mary's face, no longer twisted in anger, but peaceful, grateful. Legacy. Weeks later, Holly's recorder washed ashore, found by a fisherman. Its final recording told the tale of Mary Cotterill and Holly Annall's ultimate sacrifice to bring her peace. The cries ceased forever, and Yarmouth was finally free. Holly's name joined Mary's in the annals of local lore, a testament to her bravery and the enduring power of stories. And on quiet nights, some say you can hear a soft voice carried on the wind, not a wail, but a whisper. Thank you. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.